Hello, everyone. I am Tamiko, and I will be speaking with you all about compost, urban composting, what it is, how you too can do it. If you have any questions, please stop me and let me know. I have a couple of presentations. One is more specific to vermicompost, which is using worms to compost your kitchen scraps. And the other is just more general about composting. So I will, without further ado, start with that, if that is all right with everyone. And let's see, I'll share my screen. So what is composting? It is managing the decomposition of organic matter into humus or earth. And organic matter is, food, paper, leaves, all stuff that we eat. Well, some of the stuff that we eat, we'll get into that later. But basically, it is natural amendments for your soil. All of the nutrients that are left over in, say, our food scraps, for example, can be beneficial to your soil, but we have to break it down into a different form. Like they can't just eat carrots, which I guess would be nice if they could. So for compost, this healthy humus, healthy soil contains about, 5%?
I can learn to understand you much better.
Oh my
if
goodness,
I can
I'm
get
sorry,
familiar
my
with the way you
computer
talk. I need your permission.
stop, just started talking to me. I'm very sorry. Okay. The benefits of composting. So why do you compost? Adding organic matter helps to build your soil, again, with healthy amendments. If you use leaves from your trees, the trees in your yard, to for your compost, then it's actively adding. Hello all, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be playing around. It's actively adding uh, all of the good energy that the tree had absorbed the last season that they then dropped in all of the leaves. That all gets recycled right back into your soil if you go ahead and use those leaves in your compost. You can save money. You don't have to go to the store and buy compost or what do we get a lot of up here? People use salt marsh hay to add to their soil as an amendment. People use things that we can get from the sea. They use oyster shells and lobster claws. So there are all sorts of things that you can add that will be beneficial to your soil that you might just be eating. It will also attract beneficial organisms to your soil. So you can purchase specific compost worms, but the natural organisms that are in our ground, worms, ants, other things that will tunnel and create aerating passages will also be attracted to the bacteria as it's breaking down from your food. And my favorite, this is how I really got into composting, reducing your trash output. I was sort of, I don't know, becoming very tortured by the amount of trash I was producing in the world. And as a gardener, composting is a really easy way to manage that. Again, right, you can get all of the leaves that are in your yard. You don't have to throw those away. All of my plant waste at the end of the season, if it's appropriate, I can compost that. And then throughout the winter, I can compost my food using my worm bin still. So those are all things that aren't getting thrown out and added to landfills, which is nice. I will take a moment, I guess. Yvonne, I know you'll disturb me, but I can't see the Zoom screen right now. So does anybody have any questions? No, I don't see a chat. All right, I'll keep going. Where are we? The benefits of compost. No, that we already did that. Ways that you can compost. So one way that I have used in the past, but don't have right now to show you, is a pallet bin. So you just build a bin, 4 walls. A lot of people do it with excess pallets that you can find sort of in trash piles, industrial trash piles that are readily available. You might line it with chicken wire because we're in the city and we have, well, I guess now that we're doing this virtually, you could be anywhere, but I am in the city. So I would line mine with chicken wire because we have rodents and bunnies and all sorts of things that can get into your compost that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily bother me that they're in there, but they certainly scare me when they jump out. So I would rather just keep them out. And in this case, I don't see a lid for this one, but you would want to put a lid on it because it will keep it dry. Um, this person has a single pallet bin. If you have a lot of space, a really good way to manage your compost is to have more than one. You can actively be, say, letting things decompose in this one. You can be adding things, new things to this pile. And then maybe this is a pile that's sort of already done and just ready to be dumped into your yard. And so you can have compost at different stages throughout your gardening season that's ready or, maturing. Another way to compost, again, these are sort of preferred for the urban environment, are enclosed compost bins. So you can get a tumbler. This kind is sort of very easy on your back to manage. You can dump your food in, and then you use these little handles to easily roll it around. Rolling it around keeps the food from sort of piling up and clumping into a big pile of mud. It aerates it. It introduces air to the process, which helps it continue to break down. If you don't introduce air to your composting process, it becomes what's called anaerobic, which means, well, that there's no air. Sorry, it's not the best definition, but there's no air that's being introduced to the process. In the composting process, what that means is it's really wet, and it's heavy, and it's not breaking down the way that you want it to. It is instead sort of just rotting like garbage can. And then it's not going to add anything good to your yard, and it will smell bad. So enclosed bins tends to have some system by which you can aerate your compost. In this case, you can rotate it. That's how this one tumbles. These are more passive bins where it's a pile. So you'll dump the food in on the top, and the idea is that as it falls to the bottom and breaks down, over time it will break down, and then you can open a door on the bottom. Where is it? This one has a door here, and you'd be able to just dig out your compost. This is another type of passive bin where you can sort of put the food in on top. And then I think these are drawers that you can pull out, and you can sort of see, and then there's holes inside of the drawers. So you'd be able to see if the stage the compost is in. So how much it has broken down, if it's been able to fall through to the next level, and if it's sort of small enough and done. And then this last one is it's just a trash can. This is one of my favorite methods, just because it's really easy, right? You take a trash can, you make sure that the lid is secure so that creatures can't get in, again, because it's, rotting trash. They'll want to eat that. And then you put some holes in it. This person just drilled some evenly spaced holes all around the bin. And now they can put their compost in there, and same thing, it'll break down. The only difference really with the trash bin is that they'll have to dump this whole thing in order to sift out all of their compost, just to get at whatever's at the bottom. Whereas these designs are sort of designed for you to easily be able to get the finished compost from the bottom. The tumbler, this is also what I have, is also you sort of have to empty the whole thing to get your compost out, but I don't mind doing that. All right. And then again, more on these guys later, but you can have a worm bin. So this is sort of a commercial worm tray, a stackable worm tray. You put your worms and your food in on top, and over time, so assuming you've started and your bins are all empty, when this bin is full, you'll grab an empty one, put that one on top, and add your new food. The idea being that by the time these trays get to the bottom and you've sort of rotated the full package, hopefully, or the package, all of the trays, your food waste will all have been eaten by the worms, and you'll be left just with, worm poop, vermicompost. This similarly is a do-it-yourself version. You can just get a covered bin, and in here you would put some form of bedding for your worms and your food, and then you would sort through it as things broke down and when it was time to get the worms poop out. This is a happy composter turning his compost pile. Active composting. I was talking about this before, aerating your pile. So if you do want sort of your compost to be prepared ever so slightly faster, it's a decomposition process. You can't really speed it up, but there are ways to manage it. I'm going to contradict myself immediately. It's hard to speed it up, but there are ways to manage your compost so that you can make sure that it's working most effectively. One of those ways is to aerate your pile. So you are activating the bacteria again. You're sort of creating space for the bugs that have been attracted to move around and keep tunneling and eating. And it gives you an opportunity just to sort of see what's going on in there. Is it heating up, which is the process of everything decomposing properly. This is a 2-bin system that they have, so they can move it from one to the other, and you can just sort of see everything that's going on in there. If there's something that's too big and needs to be broken down further, that can slow up the process. Or, well, it can just take a lot longer for something to decompose if it hasn't been maybe chopped into a smaller size. This is more about training your bin. So, right on a tumbler, easy, you just tumble it. With maybe a smaller bin that's got a bit more of a structure, you might need tools so that you can dig in there, shovels and like a little hoe. I have found to be helpful, and a rake to get things out. And then with the pallet bins, it's easiest, I think, if you just sort of build a door so that you can, this one, I don't see any hinges, but you can sort of, put hooks on or something that's really easy and pull the door off and set it aside so that you can go ahead and sort of shovel everything out, mix it around, and sift your compost out if you need to, and then put everything else that has not finished decomposing back into the bin. Dun, dun, dun. All right, before I move on to passive composting. Oh, someone has raised their hand. Hello, Yvonne.
Hi, it's me. I have a quick question. Do you have to monitor the temperature of the compost at all? Is that something to keep track of?
So that is a thing. I am ashamed to say that I do not. I am a bit more of a passive composter. I don't know. Well, we'll see how you feel about whether or not I'm a passive composter at the end. But I don't know what the optimal temperature is. There is one, and people do keep long compost thermometers. We have one at my community garden that the people that are responsible for it will use to make sure that it's actively breaking down. I think that's sort of extremely important in a commercial environment where you want to make sure that just in case anyone is introducing inappropriate bacteria, weeds, maybe seeds for things that you don't want growing in your garden, you'll want to make sure that your compost actually gets hot enough that it is sort of destroying any bad bacteria. But for me, on an individual personal level, I know everything that's going into my compost. So I guess if it doesn't necessarily get hot enough and break down, I'm okay with it breaking down after I've tossed it in my soil. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
Of course, no worries. All right,
Pamela. I have one more question from Pamela. In particular, she's wondering about the overabundance of Amazon box cardboard. I don't know, Pamela, if you want to turn on your.
Yeah,
she might have left the meeting. I don't see her in that list.
I'm sorry, I've got noise in my background. I'm trying I don't want to bother people. No, I tend to end up with a lot of cardboard, and I kind of worry about that.
Yes. Well, okay. What do I do with my Amazon cardboard? I am I saw a very funny meme online the other day that was like, how adult are you? Like, do you like that box? Or should you break it down, or is it a good box? So you might want to keep it till later. And I thought that that was really funny because I do that. So I do have a little bit of a box collection in my closet. I don't know why. I might have an aggressive mailing situation coming up soon. But I do. So I put Amazon boxes, smaller ones, or, of a size that I can break down into my worm bin. That's a really good way to keep moisture down quickly. I can just throw a dry piece of cardboard right in there. And if I'm throwing fresh fruit or food in and not being as responsible about bedding, that will help me keep moisture down. If you are a gardener, you do have space to garden, and you maybe have a problem like keeping weeds down. I use my cardboard for that. I will put it down sort of over pathways in our community garden plot, and then we'll put the mulch over that cardboard. It's sort of an organic layer that will break down. It does not do anything bad for your soil, and it will help to keep those weeds down in a really sort of fast and helpful way that you'll be happy for in July when you're not breaking your back with the cardboard, or sorry, with the weeds. What else is there? What do other people do with their cardboard to keep it from going into recycling bins or the trash? Does anybody else do anything fun? I see the chat. Oh, in particular, I'm
I
wondering.
will tell you what I actually do with some like smaller ones is I scoop up my kitchen trash and I put them in the cardboard, and then I use the cardboard and I just dump the whole thing instead of dumping a scrap bin.
Huh?
I toss the whole box in.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
Anything I can do lazy, I will.
I don't know that I would call that lazy. It's effective. Thank you very much. You save yourself time wherever you can, and effort. Yeah, well, so that's what I do with my cardboard. I save it, I try to reuse it wherever possible, and then I do sort of aggressively use it in my worm bin, which I can show you in a little bit. So passive composting. This is in particular when you have either sort of a tall enclosed bin or one of the pallet bins that I showed you, is just when you layer your compost in what's basically, well, they call it a lasagna method, but what's basically an appropriate method for decomposition. So in this case, right, there's an excellent use of cardboard, Pamela. You can put cardboard or several layers of newspaper that have been soaked in water. Again, I don't do this. I would just throw this in dry. It'll get wet. It'll get wet by virtue of sitting in the bin. It'll get wet by virtue of the vegetable scraps that you're about to throw in. Fresh, sort of your green layer of things that you put into your compost, your food scraps, lawn clippings, those are all fairly wet. And so as they break down, they're going to moisten that cardboard. Your brown layer, so the shredded leaves, shredded newspaper, hay if you have it. If you're buying, although you might just use them in your garden, when you're at the garden shop and they sell the potted plants in like those cool sort of coconut coir packages that can be thrown into your compost for your brown layer. If you are like me and aggressively having wine delivered in this pandemic, you have a lot of this sort of compostable wine packaging. Those are great. And that's maybe a second layer of recycling. Those have often been recycled already. And so, yeah, so you just keep stacking things using this lasagna method. And then you just let it sit. You sort of cover that pile and leave it. And then you can go back to it maybe in a couple of months. I would say probably 6 months is good. If you're impatient, like I would be, at least 3. And then, you can see how it's done. At the end of this process in general, I don't have a good example of one, but people have sifters, and you just sift through all of your compost. So anything that's too big and hasn't broken down will go back in the bin. And after you've emptied everything out, you can sort of separate what has broken down and what hasn't. Another passive method that I like to use is trenching. So I will bury food in my garden, maybe not food that is this fresh, but probably like if I've got a bunch of food, say my worm bin is overfull, I would bury some food that has sort of started to be broken down already with a bunch of worms in my garden. And then I would cover that with soil and then, wait. Important to note about trenching, you shouldn't plant right on top of that. The food breaking down literally is hot, and can burn your roots. So wherever you're going to use the trenching method, then you should have that be, maybe in a bed that is lying fallow for the year. So you're not actually going to plant in it at all, or you can trench maybe under where your pathways will be. So your plants won't be affected by this decomposing matter. But, then at some point, right, the worms will have eaten it all. Will have broken down all of the other beneficial insects. And then you've just got a delightful amendment to your soil with little effort. What can you compost? You can compost your food scraps, so fruit and vegetable matter, coffee grounds. People do a lot of coffee grounds. One thing to consider with that is what you're going to be growing. Coffee grounds are highly acidic, so they're good for roses, but maybe not necessarily for other foodstuffs. Just investigate. Grass clippings. Oh, whoops! Sorry, everyone. Grass clippings are great. It's an excellent use of them after you have mowed your lawn. And I think some people consider it to be sort of messy to just leave them on the lawn. That's sort of an excellent immediate fertilizer. But if you have one of those pallet bins, that's a great place to sort of dump them on the side, and then you can spread your compost later. As mentioned, fall leaves are another delightful amendment. If you can sort of have a place to nicely pile them up, they break down really nicely and then make for really good mulch for all those trees. Shredded paper and weeds. Weeds is controversial. Some people, right, you don't want to put weeds, especially that have already grown seeds into your compost, because then you have created a delightful environment for them to grow. But what are you doing with all of that organic matter? Do you throw it out? Does that end up in landfill? I leave it to you how you feel about putting your weeds in your compost. Things not to add. So things basically that won't break down, right, in your trash or in your backyard. Oily things, bones, sauces, butters, fats. You don't necessarily want to put cheese in there. Diseased plants. So, right, diseased plants kind of in line with weeds. Well, no, more importantly, diseased plants, they have carried a disease, they are ill. You don't want that being like grown or harvested in your compost, right? So throw your diseased plants away. Seal them up if you want to. Manure, dog and cat manure, don't do it. It's not good. I would love it if one could, as someone with 2 dogs. It's a lot of waste, but it is disease ridden, unfortunately, and especially if you're growing food, you don't want that in your compost. Again, fat, grease, meats. So meat is another controversial one. Technically speaking, will it decompose, and does it have maybe good things for your soil? Absolutely. The problem with meat in an urban environment is that we don't have composts big enough to deal with that. So we'll smell it, right? It'll smell, it'll be gross. Your neighbors will not enjoy it. So don't, opt out of that one. Peanut butter attracts rodents, and then, right, it was on the add and do not add list. Weeds, you don't necessarily want them growing in your compost. So I didn't do it. All right, moisture levels. Your compost should feel like a wrung out sponge. Is sort of a great example, right? You don't want it to be soggy and like noticeably wet, and you'll be able to tell, right? It'll smell wet, maybe like a spring day, like one of those early spring days when it's wet and raining. You'll want to cover your pile. So if you have a pallet bin, most of those bins are covered or have a lid. But if you're going to build a pallet bin, you might want to consider making a cover for it so it doesn't get too wet. The other thing about your a big pallet or a big compost pile being too wet is that it's heavy, right? So that can be bad on your back if you're spending a lot of time moving your compost. Take care of yourselves, gardeners. Smells. So, if you know that your compost is a little bit too wet, if it has a funny musty smell, and you can easily sort that out by adding dry brown matter. So, that's more of that Amazon cardboard or paper stuffing, any cool shredded stuffing that's coming in your packaging. If you're shredding things at home now, because we're all at home, that can all be added sort of immediately and rapidly to absorb moisture in your bin. Closed bins, so any of those tumblers, my worm bin, it's been sitting out here, maybe it'll be a little wet and you'll be able to see it when I open it up. The moisture can just collect at the top at the top of whatever your container is. So when you open it up, if there are droplets of water, then your container is a little bit too wet and that you should add some more dry matter. What does your finished compost look like? I faded this picture into the background. I found it on the internet and I really shouldn't have, because it's actually a very pretty picture of compost. But it, depending on your management style, what was breaking down, it will be ready in anywhere from a quarter to a year. And yeah, if there's anything that is unfinished in your pile, you've sifted through your whole pile, and maybe there is still a corn husk or a peach pit, you can throw that back in there. The sad truth about both the corn husk and the peach pit is that they're not going to break down. Those will take forever. So you might end up throwing those out, which is a thing that happens. You might sort of have something that lives in your compost for a year and you don't want it in your yard, but you don't want it in your compost anymore. So you might eventually at some point throw all of that stuff out with your yard waste, and that's okay. Finished compost. Oh, there's a sifter. I did have a picture. So this is looks like somebody built this sifter. You can take a bunch of 2x4s and then have chicken wire in it so that you can then dump the compost on top. There's a wheelbarrow underneath. People have a wheelbarrow underneath, and then you can sort of shake the sifter back and forth, and your finished compost falls through. If you have worms in there, all of your worms will fall through, and then anything that's too big can either go back into your compost pile or you can throw it away. This is one of the enclosed bins that has a door, and so you can just sort of open the door and ideally sort of pull, and the compost will tumble out. As we all know, it's not that easy, but you can very easily sort of throw a shovel in there and get it all out. All right, it is 1:30, and I think we're about halfway through, and I can switch to vermicompost, but I thought I would take a moment to check in again with you all. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, then I
have a quick question, Tanika.
Hi.
Sorry, it took me a while to unmute.
Oh, no worries.
I was looking through the program of a previous gardeners gathering, and there was a session on compost, and the little description said something about a bread oven technique. And I looked online and I found no mention of it except by the same speaker who had come to the gardeners gathering. And it was a talk that he was giving at some other place, and there was no summary. It was just this intriguing mention, the bread oven technique.
Bread oven.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, unfortunately, I did not go to that session, nor do I know who this person is to even be able to inquire.
I'm going to try to track them down. I think his name is Andrew Brousseau, and yeah, he worked for a composting company. But it was described as a technique that can be used in backyards.
Okay. Is there anyone really quickly that is familiar with a bread oven? Like, is there a bread oven design that is specific that we could like muddle through this? I don't know.
I'll get in touch if I do find out eventually. If you want.
Oh my goodness, yes, please do. That'll be fun. No, I don't know the bread oven technique. If he said that a lot of people do it in their backyards, My guess would be that maybe it's a similar take on the lasagna method, just because that's a really easy method um, to adopt. But I don't know. I wish I had a pen and paper right now. I would write it down. I'm so intrigued. Thank you for asking.
Sure. Thanks for your presentation.
Oh my goodness, no worries. This is fun. I love compost. I'm sort of strangely obsessed.
It's not strange. Compost is magic.
All right, where are we? Now we'll switch to the worms. Um, I do have a tumbler. I used to have a pallet bin, but I let it fall apart, and so I don't right now. But I'm most obsessed with my worms. So, what is vermicompost? Okay, really quickly, why am I most obsessed with my worms? I think it's because I can have them. It's accessible compost to me all year. In New England, it gets really cold. It's hard. You know, your pallet bin can freeze. My tumbler definitely freezes and fills up. Right, it gets to a point sort of midwinter where I can't get anything else in there. But because your worms can't live outside over winter, or shouldn't live outside over winter, I bring them inside, and so they are constantly with me, and I can check on them. I guess maybe it's a little bit like a pet. I don't know. But yes, so I can compost all year with my worms, and that's what I think makes them the superior city method. What is vermicomposting? It is using your worms to eat food scraps or leaves. The worms digest and release poop called castings. Team, the last time I used this presentation, it was for kids, and there's a lot of poop in here because I thought they would like it. So I'm sorry, we're just going to go with it. It's a healthy addition that we use in our gardens to add nutrients to our soil and feed our growing plants. Do they actually eat food like we do? Not necessarily. The worm, as our food breaks down, right, it sort of breaks down into bacteria and smaller bits. They eat the bacteria as it's breaking down on the food. So they're eating that, it's going to pass through their systems, and eventually, right, they're eating all of our food matter and turning it into super healthy poop. It's exciting. This method that I just described of worms, like all worms do that, right? That they are all sort of breaking down and eating bacteria off of things. These worms happen to be very efficient at it. So they are red wrigglers, Eisenia fetida. People use them for fishing. The very first place where I was able to find my compost worms in Boston was at a bait shop. It was very fun and entertaining. There were sort of a lot of people going out and wanting to use the same thing. And I was sort of begging and pleading with them to give me the worms so I could put them in my garden. It was entertaining. You can find them online. There are many purveyors of worms. You might pay quite a bit extra for shipping just so that they can get them there to you quickly and safely and alive. But that is an excellent way to get your worms. And or if you have a friend with maybe a passive bin and a worm bin and a tumbler and they've got a bunch, they will share. I imagine, because they love worm compost and they want everyone to do it. Some of the benefits of vermicompost, no different really from composting generally, right? It's adding a healthy amendment to your soil. This is a rapid recycle method that you control entirely. It's saving you money. Again, you don't have to go out and buy healthy amendments for your soil. The worms, sort of similar to if you've seen like an ant farm, right? They're moving through your soil and creating air passageways and giving roots a place to grow and keeping your soil from getting too dense. And yeah, it's reducing your waste. None of that is going into your trash. What will you need? So we saw you can have a DIY bin where you just drill some holes into the top of a container and you make sure you have a cover so that the worms will stay in the bin. And then inside of the bin, you'll give them the food that you want them to break down, your bedding. So, shredded cardboard, other materials. We'll get to that in 2 seconds. And then your worms. So what does that look like? So this is a DIY bin. It's it's just like, one of those blue plastic bins with a cover. And then you can chop up all of your food scraps. This looks like a pile that I would put in my bin. And then in here, so right, there's probably shredded paper on the bottom so that the worms have a place to go and hide when there's no food. And there's, arguably probably bits of dry cardboard in there. And then, this sort of large pile of food. It looks like sort of to the bottom of the screen, this has already started to decompose. And so they're moving around. They're eating the food in there. This is what I have. I have a stackable indoor bin. Um, uh, I don't know. I imagine if I had one of the blue bins, I would have 12 of them. It's just a preferential method. This seemed more efficient to me, and like they would stay inside of the bin. They do. Let's see. I can try to show you my bin. Sorry, everyone. Can you see it? I am not good at this. There we are. All right, it's possible you won't be able to see inside. There is a small pile there, just of finished compost. It's not terribly exciting, but can you see there's holes in the bottom? So the worms can travel up and down in the bin. They work their way up and down those little holes, and I'll show you in a moment. There's food in the different levels, and they'll find it. So you can sort of pull it up and you'll find a giant clump of worms, and you'll know that there is a pile of fresh food there that they have found and they're working on. And yeah, they just hang out and work their way through the bin. Back to the presentation. No. There we are. So yep, you can buy stackable bins. We can have the indoor worm bin. The most important part of that is that yes, you are drilling holes in so that the worms can get air to breathe. Ways to outdoor in-ground worm buckets. So I love this and cannot wait to have a little bit more space in my yard to do this. So similar to this method where I'm pointing at my screen like you guys can see me, sorry, where you're just gonna sort of drill holes into the top so they can breathe. You can do the same thing with a tall bucket and then bury the bucket in the ground. Well, actually you would do 2 rows, right? You would do a row on top so they can still breathe, but also on the bottom so that they can pass through the bucket. And you would just open up the lid and throw your food scraps in there and leave it. And the worms can do their thing and arguably pass in and out into your soil as well. I don't know, it's meant to be sort of a really passive method of getting your compost into your garden. It just looks really cool. I like it. Seems like a fun thing to do. I'm excited to try it someday. Oh, we have someone who wants to join. There we are. Dun, dun, dun. What else? So yeah, you're gonna put this one in the ground. You can go ahead. Yeah, if you're not excited to play with your worms or touch your worms, then you can just sort of throw them in there and you never have to deal with them really. You might scoop out the bucket every so often, again, if there are things that are too big, that are not breaking down, that you just want to get out of there. You might want to clean it up, but this is meant to be a very passive worm method and it's kind of fun. So we looked at a picture of a passive bin earlier with like a little door. You can also add your worms to those bins, right? So if you've got maybe a pallet bin and you're doing the lasagna method, I would go ahead and throw my worms in the green layer. And then, you can sort of dump more brown stuff on top, especially if you haven't moistened that and that's really dry, that will be hard on your worms, right? Worms need a slightly moist environment to survive. So that's the only thing I guess the only really thing I would consider if I were adding worms to a passive system. Instead, I would just make sure I was adding them to the green layers. And then in a bin like this, I would just dump worms in with food occasionally to sort of speed up the process, right? Because the bin is a passive decomposition process, which is totally fine. And the worms can maybe just add a little bit of speed to that effort. And we talked about this in the last presentation. You can, when you're trenching, using the trenching method in your garden, I would absolutely dump some compost worms in there and just let them go ahead and do their work while I'm passively gardening elsewhere, or rather they can passively break down while I'm actively gardening elsewhere. What do we use for worm bedding inside of your bin? Coir, so coconut coir, the shredding from the outside of a coconut, shredded paper, peat, which, that ideally you wouldn't necessarily want to have to buy bedding for your worms, but you could buy peat from the store. Torn and shredded cardboard, again, is an excellent absorption medium. You'll use that bedding to bury the food. And again, right, so if your compost is a little wet, things are rotting rather than breaking down. And that, I mean, it happens. You don't have to be upset about it. It just happens, right? You might be eating faster than your food is breaking down. That's why it's nice to be able to have a passive bin in the wintertime to put things outside, but it's cold here, it's hard. So you might just want to put cardboard in to reduce some of those odors. And then, right, on the flip side, if it's too dry, it'll be a challenge for your worms to survive. So you'll want to make sure that it's a little wet. But I firmly believe that the bins sort of work it out as you add things. Worm food. It's really very similar to your regular compost bin. What is different, people might chop or shred anything that they're putting in their worm bin because it's going to be, because it's smaller, so it'll be easier for them to process. Some people like sweep their houses out and dump it into their worm bin, like pet hair. I should admit, I also put pet hair in my outside compost. I do have 2 dogs, so that goes right into the yard. Yes, not into the compost. Things that you shouldn't add. I didn't really talk through this before, and I'm sorry. Bananas and citrus peels. Obviously, those are fruit. They're perfectly delightful. You can add them to your compost pile. The problem with them is that they tend to attract and harbor flies in their peels. Like the eggs can be in the peels, so it can make your compost buggy. So that's why people don't like this. Oh, something is blinking. There is a chat. Hello. Because pet hair goes everywhere. Exactly. You can't keep it in your compost. It does what it wants. Harvesting the gold. What do they? Oh, I'm sorry. I probably didn't mention this. People call vermicompost black gold because it is so good for your garden. Easy, slow method. So a very passive method would be to move everything from one side of your bin to another. Sort of shove everything to the side and then put new bedding and fresh food on the other side of your bin. The worms will migrate over to the fresh food. And then at some point you'll be able to sort of scoop out all of the used compost, or not used compost. I'm sorry, that was terrible phrasing. I don't have a cursor. There it is. So up top, you can see this is all compost that the worms have eaten through and it's been processed. So right, there's little bits in there. Not everything breaks down, but you'll be able to sift it out. And again, anything that has not broken down, you can toss right back in to the fresh side of the pile. So that's an easy method. What are the positives and negatives of this method? Again, you don't have to touch your worms. They'll move over to the fresh food all by themselves. If you then take all of this compost and put it in your yard, it will be wonderful, but you will potentially lose all of like the eggs. So you just won't have maybe new worms growing in your bin. They'll be growing in your yard. That's not terrible. They're not necessarily invasive here. So they'll stay in your yard, right? They're not going to explode and take over and destroy our native worm population. Our temperature extremes are a bit much for them. It gets too cold and it gets too hot. So it's okay if they escape your worm bin into your garden. Another method is to use the lights and the sun. Worm bins are always covered in part because you want your worms to stay in the bin, but also because they don't like light, right? They'll sort of, you get sunburns. It's very unpleasant. So if you put your worms in the sun deliberately, you can put your piles in the sun like this, and they will bury themselves and move away from the sun to the bottom. So then you can sort of take off an outer layer of compost, sift through it. They will continue burying themselves. And at the end, you will have been able to separate all of your compost. And then you'll just have a little pile of worms, a bunch of piles of worms that are hiding from the sun. And you can scoop them up and put them all back into your compost bin. How do I feel about that? It's a very fast method. I definitely feel like I'm torturing my worms. But I have done it, especially if it's, late fall and there's only so much sun and I want to get all of this done quickly. And vermicompost, what do you do with it? So you can make compost tea. Some people take some of the compost, the worm poop, and they'll put it in a gallon of water in their watering can, whatever, and then you can water your plants with it. Some people, I will mix it right into my soil. People have their own soil recipes. I'll have, whatever is local soil for my garden. I tend to add perlite to make it so that we can aerate the soil just a little bit because it's kind of heavy. I'll add anything that's come out of my worm bin and maybe anything that I have filtered out of one of my other bins as well. Or some people use it just as a top dressing, or not unlike mulch, right? So you'll just sort of spread it around after you've buried something or planted something. And when it rains, then it's just sort of a passive fertilizer. And helpful websites. These are just some places that I have found online. I have, it's not a plug. I just happen to have ordered my worms from this guy. Lovely, efficient, fast. Yeah, that's that. Does anyone have any questions? I can stop sharing and say hello. No dice? All right, well, then I will very quickly start playing with my compost bin. If you guys can see it. Just so that maybe you can see some worms. No, there's none hiding in there. This tray, see it all? I don't know, this is bad lighting. Has like decomposing matter. I've got some wine corks. What looks like old flowers. Random things that I will put in my compost. This one has like shells and egg cartons. It's the end, well, it's the end of winter. It is spring, we are here. So my bin is pretty full, but everything has also been in there all winter. So it's gonna be closer to being used really than broken down right now. So let's see if we can find some worms. Ooh, there's a bunch of worms. Can you see them in the bottom of this tray hanging down? And they're just gonna, oh, there you go. You can sort of see them being wormy. So they're just sort of looking up and down and hunting for food and making their way. But why are we going through this exercise? Because I have 2 trays that I've been saving for you. This one is totally pretty much done compost. This is what it looks like. It's pretty. Can you guys, I can't tell if you can see it.
If you back up a little into the sun, like it is now, you can see the compost inside your bin.
All right, cool. So yeah, like there's not a lot of worms in this tray, but it is sort of all done, and that's what it looks like. So it's pretty, like the texture is sort of crumbly, it's dirt, it's like dirt. And yeah, you can just sort of mix it right in. But then this last one this has been sitting outside all winter. And this is what it looks like after I've sort of just like mixed it in with the soil. So there's, like eggshells and bits of matter, like plant matter and stuff in there. But right, it's just good organic dirt. That's it. That's all I got. That was my show and tell with my worm bin.
Right. Tamiko, I have a question.
Yes.
So if you were to leave your worms outside over winter, I guess if it freezes over, will they kind of come back, or do you have to buy new worms, or?
So I will say, if you are buying worms commercially, they will tell you that you should not have them outside below like in the 40s, and that you shouldn't have them outside above like the 80s and 90s. And I have certainly seen a massive worm exodus where it gets too hot and all the worms sort of flee from your bin. So I've definitely seen the hot side of that. Do they freeze to death? I think it depends on your bin. So if I had this small black bin that you saw outside, it's too small. There's not enough of a mass for them to keep warm and like huddle somewhere on the inside. So they would almost certainly freeze to death. That's why I bring that one inside every year. But in like, I have it's a pallet bin, right? So how big is a pallet? Maybe 3-ish feet. So like 3 feet square. And I have found my worms, if I throw a pumpkin that I carved, you'll find them sort of all clustered in there at the end of the winter. So I think maybe if there's a place where they can insulate and huddle and be warm enough, they will survive. But conventional wisdom says they would not survive our winters. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you for answering.
No worries, of course.
The only other question I see in the chat is Susan Pranger is asking about wine corks going into the Vermi bin.
So wine cork is tree bark. It is perfectly good organic matter, and you can throw it right in your soil. I went through a small phase where I was like, oh, it's like mulch. And I was just sort of throwing wine corks in my yard, but then it kind of looks a little bit like trash. So I got mad at it, but now they go in my worm bin and not just directly into the garden. But yes, it's good organic matter. It'll break down. It's totally fine for your garden. Anything else?
I don't see any other questions. We have about 15 more minutes until 2:10.
Really? I don't know that I realized that. I'm sorry. I thought we had an hour. Well, we can chat for 15 more minutes about whatever you guys want. But we also don't have to keep everyone. It is a lovely day in Boston.
I do have some links to share with folks, and I will put them into the chat. And I will send that now. One is a survey. Others are about newsletters and opportunities with the trustees that everyone here can click at their leisure.
Thank you, Yvonne. I know I sort of quickly went through that. It looks like City Natives is open, but is limited capacity. Was that true?
I do not know, but I'm sure we can.
Yeah, no, right. That's fine. That's fine. I was excited to see that it was open. All right, well, I don't know what to do, everyone. I'm happy to keep answering questions, but I don't actively have anything else to present to you all.
I actually have to go because I got a 12-page paper for school to write.
Oh, well, do a great job.
But I want to thank you. I had never seen, I tried worm composting once and it just kept getting too wet. But I think maybe that stackable thing, if I can figure that one out, might be good. So I've never seen anything like that.
Oh.
The other thing, if anybody has a house that's like, say, 100, 125 years old, they should look around their backyard because a lot of them might have a buried cement cylinder. And what those were they used to have slop buckets in it, and the pig farmers, when Boston was much more agricultural, used to come around and you would put your food scraps out there, and the pig farmers used to come around and collect them. Kind of like bootstrap composting now.
Oh, no way. You know what? There's a funny little sort of bucket looking lid thing on the side of my house. And I don't know what it is, but I've always wanted to use it for composting. Well, I can throw things in there.
Actually, my parents had one in the house I grew up in Dorchester, and they eventually knocked it in because they had kids and kids would fall in it. But I have one in the house that I have, and I actually planted my mint in there so it wouldn't overtake the garden.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And what I actually did is I looked it up, and if it were new concrete, you'd have to worry about acid, but after about 100 years, the acid's leached out completely.
Oh.
And a lot of them are a little bit cracked too, so that, that might actually work for some aeration-y type things. But,
No, yeah, that's brilliant. Oh, I love that. Now
anybody who has a house that's about 100, 125 years old, they can take a look around. That's what they were, because I didn't know what they were for years. I went and researched it. But it was because pig farmers used to take the food scraps. Used to come around with their horse and wagon.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That's a treat. A little history and a fun garden mystery.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm gonna try to do the worm composting again. We'll see.
Oh, please do. If you reach out, I'll let Michelle know. If you reach out, you can get my contact information. I'm happy to share.
Yeah, I'm going to have to remember that because right now I'm kind of still thinking 12-page paper due tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Take care.
I don't see any of the questions coming through, but I did make a note of that question someone else had earlier about the bread oven technique. I don't know, you said you didn't have paper and pen, so.
Oh, thank you.
But I agreed with you that it probably has something to do with the lasagna method. I don't know what else it would be. It's an easy backyard method.
Bread oven. Right. We've got time. We can just explore. Now we can just ask the internet.
We have another question coming in. Susan Pranger asks, my father got flies and quit his bin, but I have heard that if you throw a cloth over it, it helps interrupt the life cycle of the flies. Any experience with that?
Putting a cloth over it to help. I could see that. So I move my worm bin out onto my deck in the summertime, and I definitely have to sort of aggressively clean it before I bring it back in, because things can crawl in and out of the holes to aerate. So I could see that if you put maybe a cheesecloth over the first level underneath the lid, of course that would help mitigate the problem. I like that. Yeah, but I think if flies are a thing that you absolutely just do not want in your worm bin, you would want to be very careful about putting certain fruits in there, right? Like the bananas, any citruses, anything that might harbor its own bugs in traveling. Grapes, unfortunately, can harbor like bugs and things. And then, I would be very careful about where I kept it, right? So keep it inside. If you are going to put it outside, make sure that you're doing something to make it so that, yes, it can breathe, but then also so that other things can't get in, which is so hard. Bugs are so small. But yes, I do sadly have, I don't know, like some sort of white fly, something from the garden that is in my bin. And it happens every year. I just rinse it out in the fall and hope for the best in the winter. And it's usually fine. All right, I got a whole lot of nothing on this bread oven method.
I think we probably are on the same link, and I think it's the same one that I think her name was Dell who came through. It's the same presenter who was talking about the technique, and there's no other details, but and Andrew Brousseau has a secret.
All right, well, based on absolutely nothing, I'm saying it's the lasagna method. So when I first got my worm bin, it came with a cheesecloth actually for the very bottom level so that your worms didn't fall like all the way down. But, you know, all the way down is like an inch. They can crawl back up. It's not, I stopped using the cheesecloth after it broke down, but that was one thing I remember was sort of, I was entertained by when the worm bin showed up. I was like, really? Cheesecloth? Okay.
I actually did a worm bin in an old apartment, and we did sort of the plastic tub method, and the lid didn't fit over that nicely. So we got like an old sheer curtain and put that over the bin and then put the lid on top. And that helped a lot keep the fly away. So maybe instead of at the bottom, putting it at the top. But also like what you were mentioning, this you sort of to circumvent the flies in the first place, you don't put the certain things inside of the bin.
Yeah. Which, you know, it's unfortunate. Like I want everything to be in my bin, so I'll put it all in there. I'm fine, but you know, I get that. You definitely don't want flies in your house.
Right. I think I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. You can stick them in the chat or unmute yourself.